Okay, so I had a really long flight and I am in between books, so I figured I'd dissect Andrew's quote analysis of the recent DNC debate. Most of this was done on my phone, hence the in-shot overlay on the videos and the text-to-speech. All I can say is, if you are actually donating to his Patreon, you are either getting robbed blind, or you enjoy hearing, let's just call them, alternative facts. At this point I'm convinced that his self-styled title of senior policy analyst is satire.
Million clean energy jobs, while at the same time eliminating the 10.3 million jobs that exist in oil and natural gas. That's a net loss of 300,000 jobs, but no big deal.
Except 10.3 million jobs do not exist in oil and gas. That number is closer to 2.7 million. Andrew here is citing an article on an oil and gas publication that cites an oil and gas industry study that concluded that the oil and gas industry directly and indirectly affects 10.3 million jobs. The majority of those jobs are not directly oil or gas jobs but in support industries like construction, manufacturing, warehousing, etc. Many of these jobs would simply in turn be used for clean energy projects replacing their fossil fuel counterparts.
What unites us is that right now, on Mitch McConnell's desk are 3 bills: universal background checks, closing the Charleston loophole, and passing my bill to make sure that domestic abusers don't get AK-47.
Universal background checks and the Charleston loophole aside, you don't need a bill to prevent convicted domestic abusers from owning guns because they already can't, thanks to the domestic violence offender gun ban, which has been in place since the 1990s.
Okay, genius, but without a background check, how does a gun retailer know the person they're selling to is a domestic abuser? In most states, private sellers aren't required to run a background check to sell their guns. They can unwittingly sell a gun to a convicted felon. Likewise with the Charleston loophole. A retailer can proceed to sell the gun if the background check hasn't cleared on the 3rd day.
Believe that you can solve your own problems better than any politician. Go to yang2020.com and tell us how $1,000 a month will help you do just that.
Except that Yang, a politician, is suggesting that if you vote for him, he will get you $1,000 a month to help solve your problems.
Yes, this is fixing a systemic problem. Over the last 40 years the added economic gains have gone entirely to the top 1% or so. Middle and lower incomes continue to fall behind rising costs of living. This has all happened as taxes on corporations and on the wealthy have been drastically reduced. Middle and lower income earners have lost buying power. Putting some of that money back into the hands of those who need it the most will allow them to use it how they see fit, which will include stimulating the economy, as well as helping them deal with the job losses that automation is causing, something you've been misleading your subscribers on by way of cherry-picking and misinterpretation.
Also, what challenging times exactly? Hispanic unemployment in the United States is near an all-time low.
Yes, the U6 unemployment rate has continued to drop since 2010, but middle and lower income earners continue to face the problems I just mentioned. Also, moving away from the U6 metric which doesn't count discouraged workers, you'll note that the labor force participation rate remains at a record low. I'm sure you know all of this, being a senior policy analyst and all.
And median income for Hispanics rose to $50,000 a year. That's the highest it's ever been in American history.
Okay, time for some Econ 101. Median income is one of those indicators that is pretty much always rising. Yes, Hispanics, like most everyone else, are making more than they ever have. By the same token, things cost more than they ever have. Why? Because that's how inflation works. Remember how much a hamburger or an ice cream sold for when you were a child and compare that to how much they cost now. They cost more now, correct? By the same token, the median salary is also higher than those days. Now the problem is that median incomes aren't rising in tandem with the costs of living. The added gains of the growing economy continues to go to the top earners, thanks to the scam known as trickle-down economics aka Reaganomics, whereby taxes on the wealthy and corporations have been slashed, and unions have been gutted. This by the way is specific to the United States. This growing economic disparity isn't anywhere near as pronounced in other OECD countries. With the exception of countries like Mexico, Chile, and Turkey, we not only have the greatest income inequality, we also have the highest infant mortality, violent crime rates, along with lower lifespans, and lower literacy and numeracy skills. Here is David Pakman interviewing Les Leopold on this growing income inequality. Leopold is the author of the book, Runaway Inequality, An Activist's Guide to Economic Justice.
We've talked on the program about the increased productivity that we are seeing from workers in the United States, but that since the late 1970s, early 1980s on, those productivity increases have gone overwhelmingly towards corporations, executives, and those who were already sort of at the top of the economic ladder. What triggered this? In other words, why did this start happening in the late 1970s?
Well, as you point out, there was a phenomenal shift. If you look at the chart between productivity and average wages rose all the way from World War II to about 1980, and then the two lines split apart. It's the biggest shift in economic fortune that I think I've ever seen. And the reason was that we went to an entirely different policy regime, which in the book we call the Better Business Climate model. And the essence of that model was cut taxes primarily on the wealthy, cut regulations on business, and cut back social spending so that people would go out and work as opposed to rely on government handouts, or so they said. That Better Business Climate model was accepted by the entire economics establishment. I was in graduate school then. I saw it just rip through our school, and both political parties. Now, the kind of dirty little secret of the Better Business Climate model that they didn't describe is that there's a real difference between deregulation of the real economy and deregulation of finance. They were talking about breaking up, monopolies like AT&T and, Bell Telephone at that time, and airlines and trucking. What happened was deregulation of finance took hold, and that sent wages in the financial sector through the roof because they were able to basically strip mine the rest of the economy. I call it financial strip mining. And that happened at such a furious pace that average wages stalled even while productivity was rising.
And when we talk about this divergence that has taken place, we also have to talk about the sort of idea of the United States as the land of opportunity and the American dream, where people pull themselves up by the bootstraps that they may not even own or can afford. And when we talk about productivity in that sense, it seems that there is a great opportunity as a worker in the United States to produce significant amounts of value, be it in services or goods for corporations. But it seems that the retention of any of that productivity and value created from work is what people don't have increasingly the opportunity to retain. I mean, is that a sort of accurate way of looking at the opportunity that exists in the United States?
Well, yeah, we have a couple of chapters in the book that measure American exceptionalism compared to other countries. Just right. How well are we doing? And one of the big measurements is the measurement of upward mobility, where they look intensely at 7 countries. And the odds in the United States of your kids doing better than you, it's 50-50 in the United States. We're last on the list. In Denmark, which is first, it's 7-1. The odds are 7-1 that your kids will do better than you're doing. And that's because Denmark has the much less inequality than the United States has. It also shows up in poverty statistics. There are 27 countries that were measured. The United States ranks second to last. And again, on that list, the countries in Northern Europe that have the least inequality have virtually eliminated childhood poverty. So there are real consequences for letting inequality become runaway inequality. We've always had inequality. That's just a fact of life. That's not what we're talking about. When the ratio was 45-1, there were many wealthy people in America. They lived quite well. But 829-1, now you're talking about the stagnation and impoverishment of the rest of the population. We really are in danger of splitting in two.